gives a fuck about an Oxford comma? By Great 78.
Who gives a fuck about an Oxford comma? I've seen those English dramas too. They're cruel. So if there's any other way to spell the word, it's fine with me. With me.
Chapter 3. I Alone. Hermione. July 1999. The most noble and ancient house of Black. For better or worse, Hermione's final year at Hogwarts was complete, and she was glad to look forward to a fresh chapter in her life. Still, the fact that Oxford had not gotten back to her about her accommodations plan nagged at her brain. Still, the university campus mostly shut down during the summer months. There was nothing that could be done until October, when classes recommenced. In the meantime, she holed up in the dreary and foreboding 12 Grimmauld Place. Her best friend, Harry, had been kind enough to offer her a place to live once Hogwarts finished in June. Though her parents were at least speaking to her again after she'd restored their memories, Hermione still did not feel welcome in her childhood home at Heathgate. So she moved in with Harry, hoping that, now that school was done, she and Harry and Ron could find a bit of that old golden trio magic they'd shared at school once more. The only problem was, so much had changed in the last year for them all. Harry and Ron were incredibly busy with the Junior Aura program. It was mentally and physically exhausting, and the handful of times that Ron stopped by Grimmauld Place after training sessions, he and Harry spent almost the entire time dissecting the day that they'd spent in training. When Ron did stay the night with her, their time together was rather perfunctory. He was often too tired for foreplay, and so she usually just relied on a lubrication charm to start and finish the deed quickly. Many of these nights, Ron was already fast asleep by the time she returned from the loo. Still, she waited to hear back from Oxford, daydreaming of a quiet studio flat all her own. It would have large windows and tall ceilings. She would have plants along the windowsill, and an entire wall of books, and 0 creepy paintings that refused to budge from the walls. September 1999. Michaelmas, the October term, was fast approaching, but still no word from Oxford. That September, Hermione reluctantly sent an owl to Theodore to ask if he had received any word regarding the college at which he'd been assigned accommodations. He responded that indeed he had, and that he would be residing in Peckwater at Christchurch College. Hermione gritted her teeth. Christchurch, one of the best colleges at Oxford, was where she hoped to live and study as well. Her grandfather had lived there years before during his graduate studies, and as a child she'd dreamt of living there as well. She considered messaging Malfoy, but ultimately decided against it. She and the wizard had generally gotten along last year, in spite of his constant attempts to derail their incubus assignment. Without warning, her mind's eye flashed upon the Muggle photograph that she kept in her drawer of knickers. It caused a prickling sensation all over her body. She pushed the image out of her brain roughly. In May, before they finished school, Malfoy had insisted that the assignment was of the utmost importance and could not be slapped together. For that reason, they easily put in 3 times the work as nearly everyone else, meeting almost nightly that May in their common room to discuss it. On the due date, she and Malfoy turned in a lengthy essay complete with multiple diagrams from all different angles that Malfoy had drawn and labelled meticulously. The essay was loads longer than the required amount, and their presentation was nearly flawless. Professor Thackeray had been suitably impressed, even suggesting that the two of them consider pursuing publication together. As if she would ever want to work with Draco Malfoy again. The fact that she and the haughty Slytherin had clashed in the classroom wasn't surprising to her. Anyone that knew the two of them would have expected it, based on their shared history. No, it was more the way that their disagreements had progressed that made Hermione uncomfortable to think about. He argued with her, not just over their inane assignment minutiae, but about all sorts of things. Magical theory, the proper charm to use to organize her books, even the best way to tie a tie or eat an apple. No matter where she turned, he seemed to be there, to offer her his 2 nuts on the matter. For 7 years, Hermione had been the smartest person in her group of friends. Harry and Ron might not have always appreciated her particular brand of wisdom, but they generally followed it. Malfoy, on the other hand, seemed to genuinely enjoy challenging her. His silver eyes glowed as he tried to come up with ways to improve upon her ideas, or to disprove them entirely. And something about that didn't completely bother her. So, rather than message Draco with the innocuous question of where he would be living in October, Hermione chose to remain in the dark. Besides, it didn't really matter. It wasn't like she was going to visit the man, for Merlin's sake. The end of September, 1999. The term at Oxford was set to start in only a fortnight, and Hermione felt full of beans. She was poised upon a precipice, it seemed, ready to spread her wings and soar. One of her last acts before packing up her belongings was to pull Ron aside and deliver to him the bad news that they should consider a break. To her utmost annoyance, he took her rejection in stride. "Yeah, Hermione, I understand," he said, putting on his trousers that morning. "To be honest, part of me has felt the same way for a little while now. We gave it an honest go, but with you going off to Oxford and me starting my 2nd year of training, maybe it's best we just go our separate ways and see what comes of it, yeah?" At her taken-aback look, Ron shrugged as he located his jumper, balled up on the floor in a heap. He sniffed it, apparently deciding it smelt good enough to wear again, then put it on. "I mean, it isn't that much of a surprise. We've both been on our own the whole of last year, with you stuck at Hogwarts. When you told me you were going to university instead of moving to London or Ottery St. Catchpole, I could read the message in the tea leaves." The wizard turned to look in the mirror, then removed a small comb from his pocket that he ran through his hair. "You're going to be around all those Nancy blokes up there at Oxford and won't have time for me. Besides, between pub nights with the boys and all the owls delivering messages from fans—" Hermione got the picture, even if it had been a little late. From the way that Ron would not meet her eye, it appeared that these pub nights and fawning fans had already delivered results to the red-haired Gryffindor. "I see," she said, with a voice full of flint. "Well, I'm glad we can part ways so amicably." "Oh, Miney, don't be that way. We never actually said that we were exclusive. I mean, I certainly didn't expect you to be," Ron exclaimed, a flush creeping up his neck. "And exactly, who did you expect me to be non-exclusive with, Ronald? Theodore not? Draco Malfoy?" Hermione asked with an acid tongue. Ron flinched, his face immediately clouded with anger and regret. "No, of course not. I don't know. I didn't think much about it, I guess." She got the message loud and clear. During all of those pub nights, answering all of those messages from adoring fans, Ron hadn't thought much about her at all, it seemed. He stood, awkwardly holding out a hand to her to shake. She stared at it for several seconds before accepting it, willing her own hand not to attempt to crush his fingers between hers. Ron pulled her towards him, crashing her face into his chest, clad in the dirty jumper. He hugged her stiff body tightly. Let's stay friends, yeah, Hermione? Ron murmured into her hair. Just because we're done doesn't mean this is goodbye, right? She'd planned to dump him, but somehow had managed to get herself dumped in the process. Hermione narrowed her eyes as she leaned against him, unwilling to hug him back just yet. October 1999. Oxford University, Oxford, England. But when the 1st of October finally came, all of that was in the past. She left Grimmauld Place for the Oxford campus full of hopes and dreams, her entire existence packed into 2 matching Muggle suitcases, each equipped with featherlight and undetectable extension charms to accommodate her book collection. Crookshanks was unhappily bundled into his basket, and she stepped off of the Muggle train at the Oxford station, a lively spring in her gait. Straightening her jaunty crimson beret and buttoning her long camel coat, she set off on the half-mile walk to Wellington Square at a crisp pace. The university offices would have all of her paperwork, she was confident. Their messages concerning her accommodations had likely been lost in the Muggle post due to the unplottability of Grimmauld Place. It would be a simple task to straighten it all out. But 4 hours later, after the 7th person had shuffled her along to the next office, Hermione's indefatigable nature was beginning to flag. They had located her enrollment, confirming that she would indeed be at Christ Church, which was excellent news. But somewhere between admissions and accommodations, wires had been crossed, and she had not been assigned quarters. In the back of her mind, unwelcome visions of sleeping on a park bench crept in. 2.5 more hours of back and forth with various people in several offices yielded nothing more than a couple of tears, both on her part and on the part of the receptionist in the admissions office. But she was no closer to finding a solution. And that was when, and where, the 2 Slytherins found her. Theo and Draco strolled in near the end of the business day with nary a bag in hand. Theo appeared to be cultivating a good boy gone bad look. His hair had grown out over his eyes. His shirt collar was upturned beneath an argyle jumper, and his shirt tails untucked from his khaki trousers. He had paired this look with a pair of trendy Doc Martens, and Hermione had to admit she was suitably impressed. Either Theo had gotten a Muggle girlfriend to dress him, or he had begun watching Muggle films. Draco Malfoy, on the other hand, was the polished image of perfection. His navy trouser crease broke neatly over his brown dragonhide wingtips, and the 4-in-hand knot of his navy tie seemed afraid to move a fraction of an inch out of place. He looked ready to order coffee and convene a meeting right there in the anteroom of the university office. Hermione ignored the tiny shiver that flit up her spine and crossed to the 2 wizards in a rush. "Have you received word about accommodations? I've been here for 4 hours, and I still don't have answers," she asked Malfoy urgently. Draco smirked down at her, his silver eyes crinkling with delight at her frazzled demeanour. "Hello to you as well, Granger. Delightful to see you again after so many months apart." She growled low in her throat, then started again. "Hello, not Malfoy. Have you received word about your accommodations for the year? Granger, we've known each other for years. When will you finally start calling me Draco?" he asked in a mocking tone. Hermione clamped her lips together in annoyance at the obvious disparity, but chose to simply ignore it. "Accommodations?" "Yes, I'm certain they have yours here. Have you asked anyone yet?" Draco raised one eyebrow, looking critically at her rumpled coat and askew beret. Her cheeks were ruddy, and her hair damp from the hours spent lugging her bags and the basket containing her angry feline back and forth across Wellington Square. Both she and Crookshanks were teetering on the border between hungry and feral. Yes, I have bloody well asked someone, she seethed. Unfortunately, no one seems to have answers. It is as though my accommodation response has simply vanished. Now, Draco's brow furrowed. That's odd. I got my letter back in August, same time as Theo. Why didn't you write to ask me as well? Hermione inhaled deeply, blowing out the breath slowly in an effort to calm down. Ignoring his question, she asked one of her own. May I see your letter? She held out a hand expectantly. Draco smirked once more, and withdrew the crisp piece of paper from his jacket pocket. Here you are, sweet. Hermione huffed, and snatched the letter from his outstretched hand, fumbling it open with shaking fingers, and beginning to read. Her heart stopped. Malfoy? Draco. Malfoy? Did you read this letter? Of course. Peckwater, 3rd floor, room 307, same as Theo. Where's the confusion? She took a deep, steadying breath, then turned the letter to face the blonde wizard. Did you notice this? Her fingers stabbed at the salutation of the letter. Draco leaned in and squinted, then reached into his jacket pocket once more for a pair of black-rimmed reading glasses. He took the letter from her hand and read the salutation. Then he pulled it closer, still in her hands, and appeared to read it twice more before looking back up at her. Granger, What did you do? Hermione demanded. Theo, sensing a confrontation afoot, sidled away quickly. What did you do, Malfoy? Hermione could feel her hair rising in anger, and she did nothing to stop it. Draco shook his head. Granger, I assure you, I did nothing. If this is some sick, twisted joke that you're playing on the Muggleborn, I can assure you this will not stand. One call to your parole board, Malfoy. Without warning, Draco stepped towards her, grabbing up her hand between them with the letter still clutched in it. With his other hand, he lightly placed a finger over her lips. He crowded her senses, and she fell silent from sheer astonishment to listen to his quiet words. Please, don't forget the statute, Granger. I assure you that this was not my doing. I have no more idea of what's going on than you have. To be honest, my house elf read the letter and simply told me where I'd be living, and that was that. I had no idea that this was on here. His silver eyes flashed at hers, seeming to plead his case. She stared deeply into them, then cut her own eyes away. Fine. You didn't know anything about it, but someone here must. She turned away from him so quickly, her hair slapped at his chest, striding up to the front desk to speak once again to the receptionist that she'd already made cry once today. Hermione slapped the letter onto the counter. Hello, again. My former schoolmate is here, with his accommodation letter, and there appears to be some sort of confusion concerning his name. Or should I say, our names? The young woman tossed her straight blonde hair over her shoulder, then picked up the letter. She glanced briefly at it, then looked up at Draco Malfoy, standing directly behind Hermione. Her expression immediately changed from one of hostility, shrouded in professionalism, to one of open interest. Yes, Mr. Granger, it's so lovely to meet you. Hermione felt another growl coming on. Instead, she took a deep breath. But before she could speak, Draco was talking over her. It's a pleasure to meet you as well. He glanced down quickly at the nameplate on the counter. Violet. Oxford University must be so pleased to have such a beautiful woman as the face of their welcome committee. Violet tittered, and Hermione could feel the balance of women's rights tipping off of its axis. She willed herself to breathe calmly. What can I help you with? Violet asked, batting her lashes. Well, it seems there's been a slight mix-up. Draco began, offering the woman a conspiratorial smile. You see, my name is Draco Malfoy. Violet Kinnelly! The girl placed one hand in the air for Draco to take, and he did so, brushing his lips on the back of her fingers obligingly. Hermione could feel a layer of enamel wear off of her teeth from where she was gnashing them against themselves. Her dentist father would be disappointed in her, she knew. Draco went on. "As you can see, Miss Kinnerly. Sorry, is it Miss or Mrs.? I hate to presume." Across the room, Theo snorted. Hermione stepped backwards, grinding the heel of her court shoe into Draco's polished wing-tip. She felt a light stinging jinx to the back of her ankle and jumped forward, slightly. "Miss Kinnerly," Hermione interrupted, "I do hate to disturb whatever this is, but I have been here for hours trying to sort this out. I would appreciate some answers. You will notice that the salutation of this letter does not, in fact, say Draco Malfoy." Violet dragged her eyes away from Draco, her expression immediately turning distasteful once more. "Let me just look that up for you." The woman turned her back, and Hermione turned back to Draco, who was still standing directly behind her. Elbowing him sharply in the chest, she whispered angrily, "Quit fucking flirting! We're trying to get answers, not a date." "Why can't we get both?" Draco smirked down at her. "All right, I think I figured out the problem," said the duplicitous Violet sweetly. "You see, both of you completed your admissions applications separately, and we received those at the end of the Hillary term in March. But your accommodation request letter was sent extremely late in June, at the end of the last Trinity term, so no one caught this small mistake on your accommodations recommendation letter." Hermione sucked in an angry breath. "Small mistake?" "Yes. Apparently your old professor at—" Violet peered carefully down the letter, squinting. "Does that say Hogwarts? What an odd name for a school." "What exactly did Professor Slughorn do?" Hermione gritted out. Violet tried for a smile. "A funny thing that, you see, he wrote this other bloke's name just fine, Theodore Nott." "At your service, darling," Theo piped up, but was immediately hushed by Hermione. Violet blushed. "Yes, it's lovely to meet you, too. As I was saying, Mr. Nott's name is written normally, but your name's, well, perhaps he was, tired?" And she turned the letter to Hermione and Malfoy. "To my distinguished fellows at the Oxford University Accommodations Office, please allow me to introduce and recommend some of my very best students, each of whom have already received admission to our most prestigious alma mater. They will begin their studies in October, Michaelmas term, so please make your greatest effort to find them comfortable and spacious accommodations. It would be most advantageous if they were able to live in close proximity to each other, as they are the only ones from our school to have received admission in recent years. Their names are Theodore Nott, Draco Malfoy, and Hermione Granger. Yours in service to the illustrious and noble profession of education, Professor Horace Cuthbertson Slughorn." "Oh," Draco said from over her shoulder. Hermione closed her eyes. One glance at the accidentally speckled parchment, and she could tell exactly what had happened, having been a student of Horace Slughorn. The man was known to imbibe more than a few glasses of mead or fie whiskey on an average night. This alone would have been a questionable state in which to write a recommendations letter. But the portly professor was also known to combine his drinks with the sugary jitteriness of a bowl of his favourite crystallized pineapple. It was a recipe for disaster, or, in this case, a recipe for deplorable handwriting. His hopped-up quill had simply combined the words Malfoy and, making it look as though Malfoy had 4 names instead of 2. That alone might have been forgivable, or at least understandable. But, in addition to ignoring the need for a space between the words Malfoy and, Slughorn had also completely left off the ever-important Oxford comma in his letter to Oxford University. "So, you see the problem now?" Violet asked in a superior, smarmy tone. Hermione opened her eyes, staring daggers at the woman. And no one in the accommodations office thought, just for a moment, that perhaps Hermione Granger might be a separate person entirely. "I was admitted individually, you know." Violet smiled apologetically. "Yes, but the admissions office and the accommodations office run on different platforms, you see, and no one spoke to anyone else about it. When the recommendation letter was received, I simply filled in the name in the spreadsheet." "You filled it in?" Hermione asked accusatorially. Violet bit her lip coquettishly, looking up at Malfoy with sad eyes. "Yes, to be honest, I thought nothing of it. Plenty of our students have 4 names. It's quite common amongst the upper crust of society, you know." She turned a pitying look on Hermione. Hermione gave her a deadpan stare. "I am woefully aware, yes. But in this case, when you saw the feminine name Hermione—" Violet interrupted. "I just thought that was a French version of Herman." Draco spoke up in a rumbling, flirtatious voice. "It's Greek, actually." Violet moaned quietly. It's lovely." "It's my name, not his, you daft cow. And I need some answers. It is 5 o'clock in the evening. My cat and I have been treading these halls without pause or food since 9 o'clock this morning. These 2 prats walk in, and in 5 minutes you've suddenly solved the mystery." Violet nodded. "Looks like it, yes. And so, am I to understand that I have no place to live, simply because my former professor left off an Oxford comma?" she asked in disbelief. Violet tried for contrite. "I mean, he was writing to Oxford." Hermione was nearly done with this charade. "Who gives a fuck about an Oxford comma?" Violet looked momentarily shocked before answering snidely. "We do. We're Oxford. It was named for us." "We give a Violet," Draco simpered. He turned a rakish stare at the woman. "Do you have any suggestions for us?" Violet looked as though she had numerous suggestions for Hermione, all of which included the witch taking herself and her starving cat and fucking right off out of here. But when faced with Draco's interested gaze, the young woman swallowed her rude comments and reconsidered. With mock regret, she said, I believe there's an inn near the city centre. They don't allow pets, though." "I am not living in a hotel for 9 months," Hermione growled forcefully at the woman from next to Malfoy. "Shh." Draco shushed her, his right hand snaking around her left arm, fingers squeezing her elbow lightly as though admonishing her to be quiet. Hermione bristled and stiffened, but said nothing. To the receptionist he said, I may have a solution that will accommodate all of us. My dear Violet." Violet looked up and licked her lips as she stared into Draco's silver eyes. Hermione rolled her own eyes. The willowy blonde leaned towards Malfoy, running her fingers inside the collar of her blouse, suggestively. "What is it?" she asked, in a breathless tone. "Get a room," Theo muttered from across the room. Draco cut his eyes to his old Slytherin housemate. "I'm trying, tosser," he whispered to him. Back to Violet, Draco asked, "You have my flatmate and me in 307 at Peckwater, yes?" The woman nodded. "And it's a two-bedroom flat, correct?" Draco inquired. "It is." Violet was now following his train of thought, and seemed to be trying to derail it to the best of her abilities. "But it is rather small. I don't think there's room for her there." Hermione stewed at being spoken about, as though she weren't in the room, but she said nothing. Draco went on as though she'd not reacted. "I dare say we can make something work. Granger here is rather small. I'm sure there's plenty of room for her somewhere in one of our rooms." Now it was his words that got under her skin, though in a way that Hermione was not willing to admit. She exhaled heavily through her nose, then her breathing caught as she felt what was unmistakably a hand on the small of her back. "Relax," the touch seemed to say. "We're going to work this out." "If you're sure," Violet finally acquiesced, looking anything but pleased. 5 minutes later, the three of them were crossing Wellington Square towards St. John's Street. "Ooh, look, kebabs!" Theo exclaimed, hoisting one of Hermione's 2 suitcases under his arm as they passed the brightly lit Quick Restaurant. "Theo, it's 1 hour until dinner. Let's just get to the flat, shall we?" Hermione grumbled irritably. "Malfoy, are you certain you don't mind carrying Crookshanks? He's ordinarily a complete darling. He's just tired of being inside that basket all day." The shake and the low, sinister growl emanating from the basket said anything but complete darling. It's no problem, Granger. This chap and I are old friends," Draco said smoothly, ignoring the hiss from the basket and turning it so that Crookshank's claw batted only at the air through the basket's slats. "But if I'm not mistaken, it's 2 hours until dinner." She furrowed her brow. 2 hours until the formal sitting, Malfoy, but we haven't even gotten a chance to settle into the room. My robes will be wrinkled." "Are you not a witch, Granger?" Draco's raised eyebrow mocked her once more. Hermione drew her lips together. She had to remind herself that, without Draco Malfoy's intervention, she may well have been eating at Kebab King and searching for the most comfortable park bench tonight. "Remind me again why we needed to walk all the way to Peckwater, Granger. It's already getting dark. No one would notice if we ducked into a random coat closet and apparated. Salazar's ass, it's beginning to pour down out here," Draco called to her. The walk to Peckwater Quad at Christchurch was only 15 minutes from Wellington Square, but unfortunately for them, the light misting drizzle they'd started the walk in had strengthened to a right downpour after only a few minutes. Draco had been practically goose-stepping in order to protect his wingtips for the past 100 yards or so. The unnecessary jostling was causing Crookshanks a hefty amount of disquiet, and through the bars covering the basket opening, the cat's huge yellow eyes plotted revenge, unnoticed by the three of them. Hermione shifted her feather-light suitcase and rubbed her throbbing temple with her hand, holding her umbrella. "Malfoy, did you not read the lengthy letter we received from the Wizarding Liaison in the administration's office back in March?" Draco scoffed, wiping rain from his brow. "Of course I did, Granger. Well, I skimmed it. I caught the highlights, at least." At her irate look, he backed down. "All right. I glanced at the bloke's name, and it didn't ring any bells, so I discarded it. What was there to read? A bunch of stodgy rules and admonitions about statutes of secrecy and other such nonsense. It's not as though I'm trying to apparate from right here, in the middle of the street, Granger." "Did you read it?" Hermione glanced at Theo, who was now using her other suitcase to shield his head from the rain. "Yes," he answered hesitantly. At her piercing look he relented. "No." She rolled her eyes. Rule 1. Paragraph C expressly forbids all magical forms of transportation whilst on the campus. Draco's face was a mask of horror. Does that include my— Yes, your broomstick, too, she deadpanned. The blonde wizard cursed, and like Crookshanks in the swaying cage, hanging by his knees, he idly plotted revenge for this newfound slight. Then his brow creased. Paragraph C. What was covered in paragraphs A and B? Paragraph A restricts the use of any form of magic, incidental or deliberate, outside of your domicile. Actually, the classrooms are all warded against magic, and paragraph B further states that magical folk cannot use spells, hexes, curses, charms, potions, or any other magical means to influence faculty or staff in your favour. So, I suppose for you that's one rule already broken, she mused, raising one knowing eyebrow at Malfoy. They turned right from George Street onto Cornmarket, and Malfoy sneered lightly. What are you on about, Granger? What rule are you accusing me of breaking now? She scoffed in incredulity. Come off it, Malfoy. I don't know if you confounded that woman back in the admissions office, or if it was a redirection charm, or what, but I'm certain she didn't just agree to this harebrained idea of yours on her own accord. He smirked broadly and raked his fingers through his soaked blonde hair, causing it to fall in a devilishly handsome way across his forehead. Hermione rolled her eyes at the gesture, her breath quickening slightly. It shows what you know, Granger. No magical charms needed. Violet was just happy to pick up what I was putting down. That was all my natural charm at work. She huffed a laugh as they made a left onto Bear Lane. You aren't that charming, Draco. Immediately, Malfoy's grin grew 3 sizes, and his chest puffed out as Hermione shrank within herself in mild mortification. I mean, no take-backs, Granger. I heard it. Theo heard it. We all heard it. Draco crowed. He lifted Crookshank's cage to eye level. You heard us say Draco too, didn't you, cat? A lightning-quick orange paw, full of sharp claws, shot out from between the bars of the basket and swiped a slap at Draco's face. 3 fine red lines of blood appeared on one cheek, and Draco's expression turned from gleeful to shocked in an instant. This beast is a fucking menace, Granger. Hermione only rolled her eyes again and suppressed her laughter, silently congratulating Crookshanks on his well-timed sneak attack. At least she had someone to defend her honour. We make a left on High Street, and then a right on Alfred. It's not too much longer until we're nearly there. Come on, I'm getting cold. Draco moved his left arm in a quick series of gestures that might have looked awkward to an outsider, but were entirely familiar to any witch or wizard. Instantly, Hermione felt a warmth in the air around her that was chasing away the chill of the wet October evening. She looked threateningly at him, noticing that the 3 razor-thin scratches were entirely healed on Malfoy's cheek. Mysteriously, the rain that still fell in sheets all around them suddenly seemed to no longer touch them. She looked around. Because of the rain, the street was nearly deserted. Hermione huffed a sigh, deciding that a couple of small spells weren't worth fighting over. Besides, the warming charms really did feel rather nice. There was one word that perfectly described the flat at number 307 in Peckwater Quad. Small. No, 3 words. Really fucking small. Theo kept repeating these 3 words as the 4 of them poked around the tiny flat upon their arrival a short while later. Yes, the sitting room was lovely, with a small leather sofa and a pair of adorable navy blue club chairs, one of which Crookshanks immediately claimed as his own. A writing desk sat under the single window, and 2 large bookcases flanked a minuscule fireplace on one wall. The kitchenette, if one could call it that, contained only a miniature refrigerator, a double hob, and a single shallow basin for a sink. A cafe table and 2 small stools offered cramped seating, but as the great hall at Christchurch served sumptuous meals, there wasn't much need for anything more. The loo was barely bigger than a broom cupboard, and not quite as well lit. The little sink protruded over the side of the commode, so that if one was not careful, they could bang their head easily on the faucet, and if one took too large of a step when exiting the shower, they might find themselves standing in the toilet bowl. "It's a bit tight, isn't it?" she worried, standing in the door of the loo and peering in. "On the other hand, the opportunities for multitasking seem positively limitless," Theo enthused. Draco merely rolled his eyes and said nothing. It was a 2-bedroom flat, and to Hermione's mind the sleeping solution was simple. She would occupy 1 bedroom, and the 2 wizards who had roomed together for 6 years at Hogwarts would share the 2nd bedroom. She would even be willing to overlook a couple of necessary extension charms to make their room more comfortable for them. Merlin, she would have offered to perform the extension charms herself, seeing as it was kind of a specialty of hers. But Theo had other ideas. "I claim this room," he said, bustling into the large room in the back of the flat, which had a window overlooking Peckwater Quad. Hermione glanced into the 2nd bedroom, which was a tiny bit smaller, with a window looking out onto a small car park. "Why don't we flip a coin?" Draco withdrew a knut from his pocket and balanced it on his thumb. "Leave your wand in your pocket, Not. Hands where I can see them," he warned. Theo won the coin toss fair and square, so Hermione levitated her 2 suitcases into the smaller room. Coming back out into the sitting room, she dropped to the tiny settee. "Well, at least your room will be a bit larger, since it'll be for the 2 of you." Theo chuckled from the club chair, where Crooks purred angrily on his lap. "Oh, I'm not sharing my room, Hermione." At his surprised look, he elaborated. "If you'll recall, my name was an article unto itself in that letter that old Sluggy sent. Ergo, that room is entirely mine, all by myself." Draco was just coming out of the loo, and his jaw clenched at these words. Hermione recognized his annoyance, despite the otherwise neutral expression he wore. She said, "And exactly where do you expect Malfoy to sleep? I hope you don't expect him to share my room." Her cheeks flamed pink. She was incensed by the very idea. Draco smirked, looking up at her through long lashes. "Are you offering up your room for my use alone?" Her eyes grew wide with unease. "Ah, well, I suppose, if I must." The blonde Slytherin huffed a derisive laugh. "Only taking the mickey, Granger. I would never hear the end of it from my mother if I took a bedroom from a lady." Hermione shook her head. "But honestly, there's nowhere else for you to sleep, Malfoy." He smiled. "It's Draco now, Granger, and I'll kindly point out to you that your ass is parked precisely where I'll be laying my head tonight." She made as if to jump up, but he held out a hand to stop her and smiled. "No, please. Be my guest. Sit for as long as you like." She shook her head in complete disbelief, looking first at the door to Theo's room, and then to the door of her own. Unseen by her, Theo raised one eyebrow and gave Draco the slightest of nods. Draco raised his head briefly in an upwards nod of acknowledgement. Hermione set to work, unpacking her burdensome belongings, and despite Theo's lack of luggage, he seemed to be doing the same. Unfortunately for the state of their sitting room, Malfoy was settling in comfortably as well. Apparently the 2 Slytherins were rather adept at extension charms, judging from the copious amounts of belongings they brought with them, despite having no baggage. Having unpacked her clothes into the wardrobe of her room and made up the bed with fresh sheets and blankets, She carried out the first large stack of books to place on the bookcase, only to find all but one of the lowest shelves filled. "Malfoy, you simply can't take up every bit of space in the bookcase." "You will notice that I left you an entire shelf, Granger. Considering that you're standing in my bedroom, I think that's quite generous of me to offer you that," Draco said smoothly, coming up to her and taking the topmost books from her stack to put on her single shelf. "But I have at least 7 more stacks this high," she protested. "Have you no floor?" Draco arched a brow over his shoulder at her. I don't wish to—" She broke off, shaking her head. There was not room for bookshelves in her bedroom. Bollocks. "Deepest apologies, Granger. You see, I can use the coat closet to hang my suits and trousers and robes, but I really need a place for the rest of my clothing," Draco said in an overly apologetic tone. Her forehead puckered. "I've never seen you in anything but a suit, or a wizard's robe. And a Quidditch kit." Hermione's gaze slid downwards involuntarily at the memory of what Malfoy looked like in a Quidditch kit. She huffed a tiny breath, deliberately putting out of her mind the phrases that Lavender and Parvati used to describe Malfoy and others in their Quidditch kits. Draco chuckled lightly. "That may have been true at Hogwarts, but in the comfort of my own bedroom I usually wear far less." "Oh?" Some primal part of Hermione's brain forced her mouth to speak before her rational brain could stop it. The wizard's smile grew wider, and if a person's blink could be described as winking with both eyes at the same time, Draco did it. A more crass person might have called it an eye fuck. "Of course, Granger. What, do you think I wear nothing under my robes?" She wrinkled her nose in an overt show of disgust. "No need to be crass, Malfoy." She glanced down at the bookcases, now noticing a couple of small wooden boxes on some of the prime shelves in the middle. Are those your—" A corner of Draco's mouth lifted. "My unmentionables, yes. Socks, undershirts, jumpers, my favourite joggers, my underwear." She pursed her lips in thought. "You really shouldn't have to store your undergarments out in the open like this. I suppose I could—" "Yes?" he drawled. "Well, I could rearrange a few of the things in my chest of drawers and possibly offer you a couple of drawers in my room in exchange for these shelves," she added pointedly. "If it wouldn't be an inconvenience, I would greatly appreciate it, Granger," he said, picking up the wooden boxes and carrying them to her room. He walked in uninvited, stopping just inside the door. "May I say, I love what you've done with the place." "Oh, very witty. We've been here all of 45 minutes. Draco smirked. "Clearly you haven't visited Nott's room yet." Curiously, she left her room and crossed the sitting room in 4 strides. Standing at the doorway of Theodore Nott's room, her mouth fell open. Gone were the utilitarian white walls and unadorned twin bed. In their place, sumptuous damask silver and gold wallpaper lined the wall behind the enlarged bed. The headboard was a tufted grey velvet, and matching lamps and chandelier gave the room a cozy glow. "What the fuck?" Hermione whispered, to no one in particular. At that moment, Theo stepped out of the wardrobe, which had clearly been magically enlarged as well. He was whistling along with the soft music that played seemingly from nowhere in the background. Vivaldi, if she wasn't mistaken. "Theo, I don't know if you're allowed—" "Coming to turn me in, Hermione, is that it? Going to see if you can get house points docked from Slytherin?" Theo smirked, shouldering on his robes for dinner. She exhaled, pressing her lips together. "No, Pratt. I was only going to say, if anyone aside from the 3 of us sees this, everyone's going to know this isn't right for a room in Peckwater." Theo gave her a languid smile. "Oh, Hermione, love, Do you really think that any lovely lady that I bring back to this room is going to give a single fuck as to why my room looks this way?" She scoffed. "Well, no, Hermione, she won't give a single fuck. She'll give 2. Possibly 3 if she's feeling especially randy." Theo swept past her. "Just let me check my hair and I'll be ready to go down for dinner." Hermione shook her head in frustration. "I have a feeling I'm going to fucking hate this," she said under her breath, stalking back to her room. "Hate sex is fun too, love," Theo said, blowing her a kiss and cloistering himself in the tiny loo. Back in her bedroom, she found Malfoy studying the handful of Muggle photographs that lined her windowsill. There was one of her parents, and another of her older cousin Jonathan and their family dog from when she was a child. A third showed much of her extended family on a skiing holiday in France during her 5th year. She'd chosen to miss it, so she wasn't in that photograph. Lastly, there was a photo of her, Ron, and Harry, from soon after the first task of the Triwizard Tournament in their 4th year. She had the wizarding version of this one as well, kept just behind the Muggle version. That suited her just fine. In the wizarding version, she'd been laughing, facing the camera. Ron had thrown his arms around both of them simultaneously, smiling at Harry, then looking at Hermione with so much longing in his eyes. She hadn't seen his expression at the time, but when the photo was developed, it became so clear. She remembered thinking that surely Ron would ask her to go to the Yule Ball, after seeing that expression on his face. He had not, of course, and when another boy with a similar expression of longing on his face had asked her to go, she had agreed. Now, Malfoy was frowning down at the photos. She cleared her throat. I'd like to freshen up for dinner. Would you mind giving me some privacy?" He nodded curtly and turned to go, stopping at the threshold. "Probably best you don't change this room too much, Granger. When Weasley comes for one of his inept attempts at courting, he should feel right at home in this desolate little place." It was Hermione's final straw. It had been a long day, in her defence. First, she'd taken the Circle line from King's Cross to Paddington during rush hour, an ill-advised move if ever there was one. Then there'd been the Muggle train from London, carrying 2 bulky, if weightless, suitcases, and a basketed cat who wished to be anywhere else but on another blasted train, going to another blasted school. All that culminated in nearly 7 hours of arguing and begging to find a place to live for the next 9 months. She was so done. Well, seeing as Weasley hardly ever visited at Hogwarts, and taking into account the fact that we split up a few days ago, I hardly think that I give a single fuck whether or not Ronald Weasley feels at home here. Now kindly get the hell out, Malfoy." Draco merely stared at her, with stormy silver eyes and parted lips, for just a moment before nodding, seemingly at a loss for words. I understand, Granger. My apologies." "No apology needed, Malfoy. Just keep your opinions to yourself," Hermione said in a brittle voice. He inhaled, and his mouth opened a bit more, as though he wanted to add something else. But at her thunderous look he changed his mind, and pulled the door closed behind himself, without another word. She flung herself down on the bed, checking her wristwatch. They had only 20 minutes until the formal dinner seating. She had dreamt of her first dinner seating at Oxford for years. She'd always imagined herself looking dazzlingly and perfectly put together, being charming and vivacious, surrounded by beautiful strangers who were hanging on her every word. She put a hand up to her hair, feeling the knots and tangles that had developed in it throughout the day of thrash and angst at the admissions and accommodations offices, to say nothing of the rainy walk. Sighing in resignation, She lifted her wand, untangling the most egregious knots. She looked around for her cosmetics bag, realizing too late that she'd stowed it in the tiny bathroom. No doubt, Malfoy was now ensconced in there, making his perfect hair even more perfect. Removing a small compact mirror from her purse, she swiped on the only bit of lipstick she had in the room. It was far too orange, clashing with the deep pink jumper she planned to wear under her robes, and she wondered why she even owned it. The combination looked awful, she knew, but she'd never been a dab hand at glamour charms, so her meager muggle makeup would have to do. In a moment of desperation, she swiped the orangey lipstick across her cheeks to stand in as blusher. She held the compact mirror at arm's length to inspect her work. Brilliant, she thought. I look like an orange clown. With her wand, she vanished all traces of orange from her face, then located a length of black ribbon with which to tie back her hair. It would need to be good enough. Some pieces around her face refused to be contained, but it could not be helped. It would not be due to be late for their first dinner. Throwing open the bedroom door, she found Theo, with a hand on the doorknob to the flat, tapping one foot impatiently. With his now impeccable hair and robes, and the pouty scowl on his symmetrical features, he looked late for a photo shoot, Hermione thought in amusement. Draco, on the other hand, he was only now shouldering on his outer robes over the navy suit that he'd been wearing. His hair, still perfectly in place, shone like polished gold under the low lights in the sitting room. But his eyes... As she entered the room, Draco looked up, his silver eyes suddenly a fiery molten metal for just a moment, as they made contact with her own. They conveyed so much emotions in the span of only a second. Excitement, anticipation, and something else, something almost indecent. The expression was gone as quickly as it had arrived, replaced by his usual neutral, if slightly annoyed, look, the one that said he'd been interrupted yet again. But in that brief second she had blushed so quickly and so hard that colour rose like a tidal wave on her cheeks. She looked away quickly, practically running the handful of steps to the door to stand beside Theo. "Let's go. We don't want to be late." Once out of the building, the dark-haired wizard held out an arm to escort her, and not knowing what else to do, she took his arm, appreciating his warmth at her side. They passed by the library, and she could feel her heartbeat quicken with every step. They entered Tom Quad, and the lights from the surrounding buildings gave everything an ethereal, hallowed grace. A quick, tremulous tear came to her eye, and she dashed it away quickly with the back of her hand, thankful for the cover of darkness. Oxford. She was finally here. "Straight ahead here, right, love?" Theo asked. She smiled up at him. "Yes, that's it." She could hear the footfalls of the blonde wizard walking behind them, his sure and powerful steps matching the pounding drumbeat of her own heart. His heel strikes sounded restless, almost agitated, but confident, much the way she felt right now. Her memory flashed back upon the sight of him only moments before, that blazing spark of exhilaration that, for a moment, had revealed the same fire inside of him as well. Their adventure was about to begin. Thank you for listening to Who Gives a Fuck About an Oxford Comma by Great78. If you enjoyed the story and would like to listen to more, please follow me on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. by searching for Silver and Copper. Or you can find me under Great 78 on Archive of Our Own.